Every afternoon after school, the children loved to play in a huge garden that surrounded a deserted castle. They loved to play there. One day while playing, a great voice yelled out, "What are you doing in my garden?" It seems the giant had returned back to his castle, and he did not want the children to play there. He shouted at them and told them to leave and never come back. They all ran away as fast as they could. The giant then built a huge spiked fence around his garden, so none of the children could ever get in. The giant put a large gate in the fence with a sign that said, "Keep out," in big black letters. The children would pass by and look sadly at their favorite place to play. They really missed playing in the beautiful garden. Soon fall and winter came and covered everything in snow and frost. The giant looked out his castle window at his snow-covered garden and wished for spring to come. Spring did come, everywhere except in the giant's garden. The snow and frost were thrilled to have a place to stay forever. One morning, the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard a bird singing. He leapt from his bed to look out the window. His whole garden was in spring bloom. The snow and frost were finally gone. Then he noticed all the children playing in his garden. You see, they had snuck into the garden through a hole in the wall, and spring had followed them in. One little boy was crying because he could not climb the trees like all the other children. He was just too small to reach. The giant helped the small boy to the top of the tree. The little boy gave the giant a hug and a kiss and said thank you. The giant thought it was time to let the children play in his garden, so he knocked down the big wall. The children played every day in the giant's beautiful garden. When the giant realized he had not seen the little boy he had helped to the top of the tree, he asked the other children, "Where is your little friend?" "We do not know," said the children. The giant asked the children every day if they had seen their little friend. The children told the giant, "The only day we saw him was the day you knocked down the wall." The years passed and the giant grew old and weak, and he could no longer play with the children. One cold winter morning, he was looking out the window, and he noticed the most beautiful tree he had ever seen.
Wow!
The tree was covered with delicate white blossoms with silver fruit, and beneath the tree was the little boy who had gone missing for so long. "He's come back at last," said the giant joyfully. Forgetting how old and weak he was, the giant rushed down the castle stairs and hurried across the garden. But as he neared closer towards the little boy, he saw bruises and cuts and nail marks in his hands and feet. "Who has hurt you?" asked the giant. "As old and feeble as I am, I will kill the people who have done this to you." The small child smiled gently and said, "Hush, don't be angry, but come with me." "Who are you?" whispered the giant, falling to his knees. "A long time ago, you let me play in your garden," the child replied. "Now, I want you to come and play in my garden. It is called Paradise." That afternoon, when the children came to play in the garden in the winter snow, they found their giant friend lying dead. The old giant looked so peaceful. He seemed to have a beautiful, peaceful, gentle smile on his quiet face. The giant was covered in small, beautiful white flower blossoms. The children thought he looked so happy and at rest. They said sweet prayers for him to be playing with children angels in a gorgeous paradise garden forever. The children always remembered the giant for his kind heart and generous spirit, and played in his garden forever. Once upon a time, a girl named Cinderella lived with her stepmother and two mean stepsisters. They made Cinderella clean and cook all day for them, leaving no time for Cinderella for herself. One day, the king and queen of their village announced a grand ball for all the young ladies to attend. It was time for their son, the prince, to find a bride. Cinderella had to help make dresses for her mean stepsisters. She had no time to make a dress for herself. She worked hard on the dresses for her stepsisters, and they just made fun of her. "Hurry up," said the stepmother. "I am trying very hard," said Cinderella, "as I want to get my dress started too." The stepsisters laughed and said, "Imagine Cinderella at the ball in her torn, raggedy dress." Cinderella just kept working to finish the stepsisters' dresses. On the night of the grand ball, a fine carriage picked up the stepsisters and stepmother, but left Cinderella behind to do her chores. Cinderella had no dress anyway. She had no time left after making the stepsisters' dresses to make her own. She waved goodbye and said aloud, "I wish I could go to the ball." Then, poof! All of a sudden, a fairy godmother appeared. Cinderella could not believe her eyes. "Who are you?" said Cinderella. "Well, I am your fairy godmother, and I will grant your wish to go to the ball." "But what will I wear?" said Cinderella, "and how could I ever get there?" Then, poof! With a touch of her magic wand on Cinderella's head, Cinderella was dressed in the finest ball gown and special glass slippers that fit only her. Cinderella looked at herself and could not believe it. "But how will I ever get there?" said Cinderella. And then, poof! With the touch of her magic wand, the most beautiful carriage was waiting to take Cinderella to the ball. "Have a wonderful time," said the fairy godmother. "But remember, Cinderella, at midnight, everything goes back to the way it was before." Cinderella promised her fairy godmother she would leave the ball by midnight. Cinderella went off to the ball. She met the prince and they danced all night. They danced, and they were having such a great time that Cinderella did not notice the time was slipping away. Dong! The clock rang. It was going to be midnight. Dong! Cinderella had to leave. The prince begged her to stay. She ran up the ballroom stairs, and one of her glass slippers fell off her foot. "Please stay," said the prince. "We have just met." "Goodbye," she said, as she waved to the prince, and she slipped into her carriage and was whisked away. The prince was left standing on the ballroom stairs, holding Cinderella's glass slipper that had fallen off her foot. The prince knew he must find her by matching the glass slipper to the fair maiden Cinderella who fit that special shoe. The next day he visited all the fair maidens and finally found Cinderella, who fit the glass slipper perfectly. Her stepmother could not believe it. "How can this be?" said the stepmother. "I can't believe this," said one stepsister. "Cinderella fits the slipper?" said the other stepsister. The prince knew he had found his bride. Cinderella pulled the other glass slipper from her pocket. He said, "Come with me to live in my castle, my future bride." The prince and Cinderella had the most beautiful wedding in the whole land, and they lived happily ever after. A long time ago, a woodcutter lived on the edge of a large forest with his 2 children, a girl named Gretel and his son named Hansel, and his wife who was the children's stepmother. They were very poor, despite all the hardcutter's hard work. One year there was a terrible famine, and there was not enough food for the whole family. One night, the stepmother told the woodcutter they must take Hansel and Gretel deep into the forest and leave them there. Hansel overheard them talking. He told Gretel the terrible plan. Then Hansel had a great idea. He would fill his pockets with white pebbles to leave a path back to the house when this happened. The next morning, the stepmother said they all had to go into the woods to gather firewood. As they walked deeper and deeper into the woods, Hansel dropped his white pebbles to mark the path back to their house. The next day, Hansel and Gretel returned back to the house. Their stepmother was very angry. She told the woodcutter to take them deeper into the woods. This time, Hansel marked their path with breadcrumbs from his pocket so they could find their way home. In the morning, there were no breadcrumbs. The woodland animals had eaten them all. Hansel and Gretel began to walk through the forest, and suddenly, they could not believe their eyes. They found the most amazing house, made of gingerbread, with a roof of icing and windows made of sugar. They were so hungry, they broke off a piece of the house to eat. Then they heard a voice. "Nibble, nibble like a mouse. Who's that nibbling at my house?" The door opened, and an old woman leaning on a cane frightened Hansel and Gretel. The woman then smiled and invited Hansel and Gretel into her house for a delicious dinner of pancakes and apples. After dinner, she said they could stay for the night, and she made up the beds for them, as sweet and kind as any grandmother. The children had no idea the old woman was really a wicked witch. Before Hansel and Gretel awoke the next morning, the wicked witch carried Hansel to a cage she had built and locked him inside. "Now I can fatten you up so I can eat you." The witch made Gretel cook, so Hansel would grow plump. The children cried and begged to be set free, but the wicked witch just laughed at them. Every day the wicked witch, who could not see very well, wanted to feel Hansel's fingers through the bars of the cage, so she could feel how plump he was getting, plump enough to eat. But Hansel cleverly only gave her an old bone to feel. She thought he was always much too thin for her to eat. Weeks went by, and the witch was becoming impatient, as Hansel didn't seem to be growing any fatter. One morning, the witch ordered Gretel to make a fire in the oven. After a while, the witch said to Gretel, "Climb up into the oven to see if the fire is ready." Gretel asked, "But how can I get into the oven to see?" The witch was impatient and climbed up herself to show Gretel how to look at the fire. Quick as a wink, Gretel shoved the old witch into the oven. Then she banged the door shut. Gretel ran over to free Hansel from the cage. They now had nothing to be afraid of. They explored the witch's house and found jewels and gold coins in every corner. Hansel and Gretel filled their pockets with all the riches and gold coins, and they set out to find their way home. They walked for a long time and finally came to the edge of a big lake. "How can we ever cross without a bridge or a boat?" said Hansel. "Here comes a swan," said Gretel. "I will ask her to help us." The beautiful swan agreed to carry them across the lake. Once they were on the other side, they recognized the forest edge, and they began to run down the path towards home. When the woodcutter saw them running towards him, he cried tears of joy for seeing his children. He did not have a moment of peace since he had left them in the forest. His wife had died while they were gone. The children emptied their pockets of all the gold, rubies, and diamonds. The father could not believe his eyes. The woodcutter, Hansel, and Gretel all lived happily ever after, with the help of the witch's gold and treasures. One day, the infant son of research scientists who were working in the jungle wandered off when they were not looking. The small baby boy was found by Bagheera, the very nice Black Panther. Bagheera thought the baby would be safer with the wolves and their baby cubs. Bagheera left the baby for the mother wolf to find. The mother wolf named the boy Mowgli, and they agreed to raise the boy with her wolf cubs. Mother wolf always worried about Shere Khan, the great tiger, coming to take the child away from them. Bagheera taught Mowgli the rules of the jungle and everything he needed to know about all the animals. Bagheera was always there to protect him. The wolves told Bagheera he must take Mowgli back to the human village, where he would be safe from Shere Khan. Bagheera agreed to take Mowgli to the human village. But when he tried, Mowgli got very upset and said he wanted to stay in the jungle with all his animal friends. Mowgli ran off deep into the jungle, where he met a nice new jungle bear friend named Baloo. Baloo and Mowgli played and had a great time. They met some monkeys and their king, who wanted to know how to make fire. Bagheera caught up with Baloo and Mowgli and said they had to get Mowgli to the village. But Mowgli ran away again. He wanted to stay in the jungle. Bagheera and Baloo searched for Mowgli. But the fierce tiger Shere Khan had found Mowgli first. Mowgli, who had grown up around animals his whole life, was not the least bit afraid of Shere Khan, the great tiger. This made Shere Khan very angry. Shere Khan bared his great fangs and let out a giant tiger roar and leapt towards Mowgli. Just then, Bagheera and Baloo arrived. Baloo the bear grabbed the great tiger by the tail and then threw him to the ground with a thud. Baloo had gotten there just in time to save Mowgli. Shere Khan lashed about trying to reach Baloo, but Baloo hung on tight to his tail. Shere Khan tried to shake Baloo loose and cracked his strong tail like a whip. Suddenly, a big storm rose up, and a huge lightning bolt hit a big tree and started a fire. Mowgli knew right away how to help Baloo with the fight against Shere Khan. Shere Khan was very afraid of fire. Mowgli took a branch that was on fire and he ran towards the great tiger. Shere Khan was so afraid of the fire in Mowgli's hand that he ran away deep into the jungle. Bagheera and Baloo cheered. They both knew they would never see Shere Khan around their jungle parts again. Mowgli, Bagheera, and Baloo promised they would never be parted by anything again They would always be best friends, no matter what. Just then, at the edge of the jungle river, Mowgli saw something he had never seen before. It was a beautiful girl. The beautiful girl was getting water just outside the man's village edge by the river. Bagheera and Baloo were sad, but only for a few moments, as they knew Mowgli had to leave to go to the man village with the girl. They both knew it was the right thing for Mowgli to do. They both saw Mowgli smile as he helped the girl with her water jugs at the river's edge. Then Mowgli waved as he headed towards the man village with the girl. Mowgli's friends knew it was where Mowgli really belonged. They would always be friends no matter where they all lived. Bagheera and Baloo knew they had done the right thing by helping Mowgli find his way safely to his new home, and they all lived happily ever after.